So my initial thought is, why aren't service providers who currently sit on large chunks of land doing this on their own and pursuing funding on their own, like you, Casey, or Councilmember Reynolds, Vice Mayor Reynolds, said about like COC funding? Like, why isn't this already being done on their own? I just don't understand why it's at our doorstep. But since it is at our doorstep, these are my thoughts. So emergency campgrounds, like a tent or a pallet shelter, are intermediate and superficial. Meaningful solutions should address the larger problems of housing availability and affordability, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, the list goes on. A campground does not give people the tools that will set them on a path to self-sufficiency. In addition, a campground poses concerning potential living and health conditions. In my opinion, a tent shelter would not make an individual with safety or trust issues with sheltering feel more safe than being given a structured room at a shelter with full-time staff available. I understand some will argue that a tent would be more comforting to some. However, I feel personally in my gut that it is simply another way we continue to fail those in the system who need legitimate medical treatment, detox, or mental health treatment. You simply cannot appropriately treat mental health crisis or substance abuse crisis from tents. That is not compassionate and in fact is toxic compassion. I feel the more I evaluate whether or not a campground would be an efficient use of resources, it becomes clear that a tent site clearly does not equate to secure permanent housing, mental health treatment, drug rehabilitation, or vocational opportunities, so why would we invest in this? An investment into a sanctioned campground would surely distract and sap energy from longer-term solutions. And long-term permanent housing accompanied with supportive services is truthfully the only way to help manage homelessness, if that's actually what you desire to accomplish. The reason most communities choose to pursue sanctioned campgrounds, tents, or pallets is because their shelters are at capacity. They need a temporary gap fill until they can free up shelter space. That is not the case in Chico. I know this is where a lot will start to get very frustrated with me, probably much earlier than that sentence, but here we are. As I previously have mentioned about bed numbers, and that didn't fit nicely into the we don't have enough beds narrative. I listened to that pushback, and I did look farther into what it would mean to have enough beds. What does that even look like for our community? As we evaluate solutions like campgrounds, we're making the assumption that there are not enough beds, and the counter-argument is we have enough beds. What is the definition of enough beds? We all understand it to mean beds for all individuals experiencing homelessness in Chico. To put it simply, one bed for every one homeless person. That is not the correct definition of enough beds, and it's time we change that. Enough beds actually means one bed per individual seeking shelter. If folks are not seeking shelter, we don't account for a bed. To put it really simply, if you send out 200 wedding invitations and you only get 140 RSVPs, you would not pay a caterer for all 200 people. You'd pay for those who want to eat the meal. If we have a bed for every single individual seeking shelter, that's enough beds. Just like if the bride or groom had 140 meals paid for, they have enough meals. So with this more accurate definition of enough beds, do we have enough? If we don't, then is a campground appropriate? In the past several months, outreach programs are seeing an average of at most 1 out of every 10 contacts being interested in entering a shelter. So 10% of homeless individuals are actually seeking shelter. Therefore, enough beds would be 10% of the homeless population, because only 10% surveyed actually want a shelter bed, RSVPing, if you will. To be gracious, because things shift and change and there's crises, maybe we round up to 20%. The California homeless per capita average in 2020, based on reports that were just released last week by the federal government, that are basically the most efficient things available right now, is that California has a homeless per population of 40.9 homeless for every 10,000 population. That puts Chico at an estimated 494 or 500, just to make it simple, homeless individuals. I think our 2019 pitch showed more, but that's because it was immediately campfire. Most of those folks have moved on. If these 2020 estimates from the state are accurate, and we round up to 2 out of 10 people actually want shelter, that's only 98 homeless individuals statistically interested in any kind of shelter in our community. That would answer the always curious question of how are we averaging 50 to 60 open beds a night, even with COVID capacity restrictions, when the hysterical narrative is always there's not enough beds. Night after night we see there are, in fact, beds and sheltering. It's because Chico already has far more shelter beds available than individuals actually seeking shelter. What we're lacking is mental health, drug rehab, and vocational training programs for those who are seeking or needing more than your standard shelter bed. I'm almost done. In light of the discovery that we have more shelter beds than those statistically seeking shelter and have open beds regularly that support that conclusion, I would say no, there's no need for an emergency sanctioned campground or non-emergency, however you want to clarify it. In addition, there's actually not even a shelter crisis anymore, based on there being way more than enough shelter beds regularly, which is probably the only time a sanctioned campground should actually ever be entertained. Again, enough beds is not one bed per homeless individual, it's one bed per individual seeking shelter. We have that already. We need to move on to other unresolved issues that have yet to be thoroughly addressed, such as roads, public safety, environmental protections, big bad pension liabilities, and more. So I would be interested in making a substitute motion to direct staff to stop working on the BMX shelter concept, revisit other uses for the CDBG CV funds, and rescind our shelter crisis declaration in light of these discoveries. I'm really hoping for a second on this motion, as I feel it would be in the best interest of our community to take these steps to move our city forward. Thank you for listening to all of that.
All right, you're right, that was a lot. I will second the substitute motion.
Could I get that substitute motion again? I apologize.
Yeah.
No,
Let's just go all the way through it again. No, I know, I'm so sorry. There was so much I felt was important. So the substitute motion was to direct staff to stop working on the BMX shelter concept, revisit other uses for the CDBG CV funds, and rescind our shelter crisis declaration.
So in a better explanation of my second, without reiterating anything Ms. Denley said, and something I said to some reporter that asked us today, our poor homeless solutions coordinator and also staff and the entire city and the newspaper and most of the rest of the media has a very unclear idea of what this council is doing. And I am not pointing any fingers to any of the council members, because what we have is a moving target. We had COVID, we had the fire, then we had COVID, and then we said camp everywhere. That created a problem. Then we started enforcement, and we wanted to make sure that there was places for people to go. So the BMX track came back up, because that was originally talked about years ago with wraparound services. Different service providers decided to do different things, as different service providers tend to do. Few of them follow through on everything. Now I forget where I was going with it. Oh, so why is everybody confused? I understand. I'm speaking a little bit for Susie right now. It's like, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are we doing this? We don't know. And it's not because we don't know. The target keeps moving. I think Ms. Denley did a very, very good job, particularly following Mr. Kennelly, of saying more beds are coming online, more beds are continuing to come online. I was originally a proponent of the BMX site. I went to Marysville to see how their site was working and their pallet shelters and those. And I was willing to do those things when there were not available beds. There are available beds. They're getting bigger. We heard from behavioral health, 20 years of experience. These people won't go to these places. That's number one. Number two, and we've seen this happen. We move forward with the original motion, and we might as well put a camp here sign up, whether it's for 6 months or a year. How are you going to shut that thing down? You're not politically, never. We've seen what they do to the parks. We've seen what happens at Comanche Creek. We've seen Project Roomkey. Doesn't matter. I support the service providers to the extent they do what they say they're going to do. I realize that they work within a lot of constraints as well. I appreciate what they're doing in the program that's coming, but I am not willing to turn any more areas of the city over and have them look like the park did. There are other solutions that are coming online. I think that's what we need to do, and steer away from the strategies that led to the scenarios you can see in Seattle, LA, San Francisco, and Portland, which is throw more money and more housing at people that don't want it. So that's why I support the motion.
Someplace has to solve it for this percentage of the people that is growing all the time, that is not going to come inside. And a sanctioned campground, a managed campground, a regulated campground which can be extended into to pallet shelters or Quonset huts or whatever, is a solution that gets to that percentage of the population that we can't get to any other way. We're doing away with the shelter crisis and asking staff to no longer look at any sort of sanctioned camping opportunities, ignores a huge problem that we could be a part of the solution to.
If I could respond to your concerns to the motion, I appreciate your experience and your views on why it would be beneficial and how it could reach people. My main question when I say that is perhaps one view is right, perhaps the other is right, and most likely it's going to sit that way on each side of the fence. However, if you're correct and this is beneficial and this is the solution or a big part of it that's really worth investing in, there are so many local private citizens who literally throw money at projects like this, like the Jesus Center Torres. They are so excited to throw money at legacy projects. Why aren't these service providers utilizing their land, like the land owned by Ripperia LLC by Comanche Creek, which is chat? If anybody was curious, they have tons of land. What is preventing them from pursuing private donors, reaching out to other entities, and funding this on their own, using their own land? Why is it that we have to do it? I'm not understanding the disconnect there of why this is showing up on our doorstep. We are not the service provider, they are. We are not behavioral health is. We are not experts in the homeless solutions. I'd love to help where we can. However, I need to see that you are incapable of doing this on your own before you come ask for general fund dollars that should be going towards far many other things that benefit a greater population of our citizens. So whether or not we agree on what's the most beneficial, I still stop at that point, which is why I still stand by my motion and the concept behind it, and just so we're aware.
All right. I will call the question.
Why is the BMX site not on that list?
All right, we had the question called, and we have to go ahead and take a vote. Just legally, we have to take.
Okay. Councilmember Brown?
Absolutely not.
Councilmember Denley?
Aye.
Councilmember Heber? Councilmember Morgan? Yes. Councilmember Tandon?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Reynolds?
Yes.
Mayor Coolidge?
I think it's easy to say yes on this. Aye.
So this one carried 5-2.